All right. So we are here in the middle of chapter 35. If you have the book, the Practical Tanya, which I hope I took a picture of the correct pages. Um, yeah, it'll be page 393 in the book. But let us get us up to speed. Been a fascinating chapter. It takes us a little bit of time. So what were we in the middle of? We started off this chapter. We wanted to know what is the purpose? Why do we come down to this earth? What is the meaning of life? We went off on a little tangent, quoting the Zohar that says that everybody has to be careful to make sure that the oil on their head continues to burn. And we explained that we have a wick, which is the body, or the soul that goes together. We have the oil, which is the Torah, the mitzvos, and then we have the fire, which is the resting of the Shekhinah. And last time we explained that our bodies alone cannot hold on to the revelation of the divine presence because our bodies and even our souls are ego-based. Even if I love God, it is I who loves God, whereas the commandment is not ego-based because it doesn't think, it's just fulfilling God's will. That is where we left up last time, is that it's not enough to be a Jew in the heart because my soul alone cannot uh, grab onto the divine presence because my soul, even my godly soul, the way it is here on this earth, has too much ego, and ego pushes out God, and therefore I need Torah and mitzvos. But in today's class, he's actually going to explain why, even though I'm saying Torah and mitzvos, but actually it's really more mitzvos and not Torah. Okay, and he'll have to explain why. So before we get to that, let us jump right in here. Okay. Um, just to give an example of this, okay, we have there was one time, if you have to pick a mohel, if you have to pick someone who does the circumcision, do you want to pick the one who understands the meaning of it and has been doing it for many years but is very old and has shaky hands, or do you want to pick the one that knows exactly what they're doing? You want to pick the one that knows exactly what they're doing. The deed is what matters. Okay. Um, But the question is, in our case, when it comes to Torah and mitzvos, seemingly Torah itself is also a mitzvah, right? Torah is also studying Torah is one of the 613 commandments. And even if I'm going to say the soul alone is not enough to grab onto the divine presence because the soul is ego-based, but the study of Torah is a mitzvah as well. So here's the fascinating thing about Torah study. Torah study is on the one hand a mitzvah. At the same time, I'm gonna think maybe I'll turn off this light. It'll be better. Same time, I don't know. I'm not sure. It's like just need a higher quality camera, I think is the answer. But anyways, okay. Even though Torah and mitzvos are both mitzvos, but we always seem to say them separately, right? Torah and mitzvos. In fact, the Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of Our Fathers, presents that there's three general pillars in Judaism. There's Torah, there's mitzvos, and there's prayer. Okay, so those are the three general pillars of Judaism: Torah, mitzvahs, and prayer. Even though prayer, by the way, can also be a mitzvah. But within those mitzvahs, we kind of split them up. And there's always this discussion, and it's discussed in the Talmud. It's better, Torah or mitzvahs, Torah or mitzvahs. And it goes on and on and on. And that's kind of what we're getting into today. Within this discussion of we want the divine presence to rest on me, what is going to do a better job? Is it going to be the Torah or the mitzvos? What do you think?
A better job at what?
At allowing the divine presence to rest in our lives.
Torah.
Right. We would assume Torah because Torah is naturally a more spiritual pursuit, right?
I was gonna say, is it mitzvahs because you're actually doing it?
Okay. You could also say mitzvahs because you're actually doing something.
You're being of
Uh,
service, which is the ultimate.
though studying is a commandment as well. So you are actually doing something. You are actually doing something.
But being of service is the key.
I have to say, studying Torah is not simple or easy, and you are serving God by studying as well. So
No,
what is,
service to others.
no, it's not about serving others. It's about serving God. Serving God can sometimes be through serving others, but it doesn't have to be, right? So That's the question here is should we focus more on Torah than mitzvos? In this perspective, okay, there's many different reasons why one would focus on one over the other, but when we're talking specifically about the divine presence resting in our lives, which one is going to be greater? Again, what you could do more will probably depend more on your life circumstances, okay? Um, so the answer will be found through a story that is told of Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Katsk. Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Katsk was from the city of Katsk, right? Okay, very good. Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Katsk was from the city of Katsk, and he was one of the great Hasidic Rebbes, lived at the time of the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, whose book we're reading, the Tanya. And he used to say this line, his Hasidim asked him once, where is God found? Sorry, he was asking his followers, where is God found? And the students didn't understand what he's asking. What do you mean, where is God found? God is everywhere. And finally he answered them. He said, God is found where you let him come in. That's what he said. God is found where you let him come in. So what does that mean? What did he mean by that? Obviously, God is everywhere. But the revelation of God is only where we let him in. That's what it means. This is what Shekhinah means, the divine presence, the presence of God, where you actually see God. God, of course, is everywhere. But to have the Shekhinah, the divine presence, to see God here on this earth, for that, we need to let God in. And how do we let God in? Is obviously by fulfilling God's will. We could pray to God, we could think about God, but ultimately, as we said, those can be ego based, and the only way to let God in is to fulfill His will. Okay. Similarly, Rabbi Akiva once said that a man and a woman, if they are meritorious, then God lives in their home, and he bases this on the Hebrew words of ish and isha. The word ish and isha in Hebrew are the same, except two letters, a yud and a hey. There's a yud and a hey. Those are two letters that are different, right? So there's an aleph and shin. Both the word ish, man, and isha have an aleph and shin, but the letter yud and the letter hey are the only differentiating letters. So he said like this: if the man and woman allow God into their life, then they have the Shekhinah, then they have the divine presence, which is represented in the yud and the hey, which are the first two letters of God's name. But if, God forbid, they don't allow God into their life, if they don't allow God into their marriage, they don't allow God into their home, if you take away those two letters, what happens? Then all you have are the letters Aleph and Shin, which spells Aish, which is a fire, and you'll have a fire burning in the home. Not a physical fire, but a more spiritual fire. But the point of that is that we have to be able to let God into our home. So how do we let God into our homes? By fulfilling His will. That's how you let God into your home. You don't just let God into your home by saying, God, you're invited. God, come inside, right? God's like, I'm not like a person. I don't like respond to an invitation that you send me. Like, the only invitation is if you follow my will, right? So with that idea in mind, with this idea based on the Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Katsk, who's from the city of Katsk, that the way to let God in, the way to have the presence of God is to let him in. How do we let him in? By following his will. So we understand that whenever we do a mitzvah, we are allowing God into our lives. But now the question is, which part of my life am I allowing God into when I do a mitzvah? And I'll say that again. We have now established that by doing a mitzvah, we are following God's will, and that's what invites God into our life in a revealed way. But which part of my life am I allowing God in? Am I allowing God into my soul, or am I allowing God into my body? Am I allowing God into my soul, or am I allowing God into my body? When I do a mitzvah,
Soul,
huh?
soul,
Soul, okay.
soul.
Soul, okay. Anybody else?
I think so as well.
All right. So the answer is it really depends what mitzvah you're doing. The more spiritual that mitzvah is, the more it affects only your soul and not your body. So this goes back to Torah study. When you study Torah, though there is some action involved, you have to use your words, but for the most part, you're using your mind, you're using the more spiritual aspects of yourself, and therefore the divine presence will be resting more in your soul than in your body. Sure, it rests on your lips, but for the most part, it's a more of a spiritual pursuit. Just to present this in a funny way, they tell the story of a rabbi who was studying all the laws of kosher to become a rabbi. And part of the laws of kosher is to understand the innards of a cow, right? To know if something happens to the stomach, if something happens to the intestine, something happens to the lungs. So anyways, it finally came the day for his big test. He's going to be tested on his knowledge of the kosher of the cow. So they bring him to the slaughterhouse and they show him a cow's stomach and they say, what's the law if this and this happens to this piece? So he looks at the stomach. He's never seen a stomach in his life. He's been reading the books all day. He knows what the law is if it's a stomach. So he asked the guy first, what is this thing? He says, oh, it's a stomach. Oh, if it's a stomach, then the law is like this. If it's an intestines, then the law is like this. And if it's a this, then the law is like. In other words, his study was all abstract. Study is very abstract. Study is what's the law on a very theoretical plane, a very theoretical level, right? It's not necessarily connected to the reality that's standing in front of you. And so that's the idea. Torah study really is mostly connected to the soul. And in order for, as we'll say in a moment, for it to affect our body, we'll need the mitzvah. So let's take a look here in the text itself, page 393, where he makes this point that Torah study will bring the Shekhinah, the divine presence, for the most part, only on our souls. So he says like this: Behold, when a person is immersed in Torah study, then his soul, namely his divine soul, along with just its two inner garments. Remember, we said souls have character traits. They have the 10 soul powers. Then they have the 4 garments, which is thought, speech, and action. So he's saying here that when you study Torah, you're primarily affecting your 2 inner garments, which are speech and thought, and they are absorbed into the infinite light of God and merged with it seamlessly. And this is the meaning of the term resting of the Shekhinah on the divine soul, as our sages of blessed memory taught, that even if one person sits and is immersed in Torah study, the Shekhinah is with him. So in Pirkei Avos it says that even if one person studies Torah, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, is with him. But as we're explaining here, that all that means is primarily there's a divine presence on your soul. Because primarily what you are using when you are studying is your soul. Okay? But we want that the divine presence should enter further, right? We said earlier, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, can enter wherever we let it in. And so since Torah is primarily using only the upper elements of our being, namely mostly our soul, therefore we're only letting God into mostly our soul. However, when we do a mitzvah, when we do an actual deed, we are now not only inviting God into the upper elements of our being, into our mind, and possibly into our mouth, but now we are letting God into every single part of our body. In fact, let's present this in a way that maybe you may be familiar with. How many commandments are there? Anybody wants to go? How many commandments?
The 613 that you're...
613, very good. There's 630 commandments. How many of those are positive and how many of those are negative? Good to see you, David.
248 positive.
Very good. 248 positive and how many negative? You know the math on that?
Whatever the math is.
365.
Okay. Yeah, right. The calendar, right.
Which corresponds to the calendar. Very good. So what else in Judaism do we consider? This is not medical, by the way, for the doctors here. 248, we say, corresponds to what? It says there are 200...
The number of organs in your body.
Organs or limbs, yeah, however you want to call it. Ramach Evarim, 248 limbs. Yeah, however you want to define limb. But the point is there are 248 parts of our body that correspond to the 248 positive commandments. And it says there are 365 gidim. It means veins or sinews. So again, exactly how the math works, it's obviously not calculated based on the medical science of today. It's a different way of counting, which is fine. It's however, there's multiple ways to split something and define something. But the point is that, what am I bringing out here? Is that the mitzvos are very much connected with your body, with your soul. Every single mitzvah is not only like the Torah study, right? We were saying a moment ago, Torah study is limited in that it only affects the very highest element of you. So the Shekhinah mostly is resting on your soul. When you do a mitzvah, which is completely connected with your body, then you are bringing the Shekhinah, the divine presence, not only to your soul, but to your body. And that is why mitzvos are, in a sense, greater than Torah study. and I think I said this before a few times, but the Tanya until this chapter will always put Torah greater than mitzvos. This is the first chapter where the Tanya kind of flips it and puts mitzvos greater than Torah. Okay? But now the Alter Rebbe is going to have something more than that. He's going to say not only is mitzvos greater than Torah because you are inviting the divine presence into your body, whereas Torah is only inviting the divine presence into your soul, but when you do mitzvos, you're actually inviting God into your animalistic soul, your nefesh habahamis. So let's back up. We explained in already chapter 1 that we are made up of two souls, a godly soul and an animal soul. Now, the animal soul is not necessarily evil. It's just very selfish, and it's very animalistic. It just desires to survive and have pleasure and enjoy life. That's the animalistic part of us. Now, over time, you can gain some evil parts of you, but that's the base of the human being. Now, this animal soul, we've explained earlier, is actually enmeshed with the divine soul. In other words, the divine soul itself cannot actually rest in our body without an animal soul. Because the divine soul is so divine and the body is so physical, the animal soul kind of bridges the gap. Because the animal soul, on the one hand, is a soul, which means it's spiritual. At the same time, it's animalistic, so it's very much coarse. So the animal soul acts as a connection point between our soul and our body. Okay? A lot of times we need a intermediary, right? That's in a lot of things in life. Just to give an example, right here an example. If you're talking to someone who doesn't speak your language, you need to have someone in between who understands both, right? So in order to be an intermediary, you need to have the elements of both sides. Intermediaries are very cool, right? You need to have an element of both sides. If the intermediary doesn't have some commonality between the two, it cannot connect the two. Just another example I give between the body and the godly soul would be, it says there was once a bird and a fish that decided to get married, but after they got married, the fish went swimming in the river and the bird was flying high. Because there's no real connection between them. You cannot have a marriage between elements that are so far apart, right? That are so far apart. Okay, so with that being said, so when I do a mitzvah, in order for me to do a mitzvah, which is what my godly soul wants, in order for my godly soul to make, right? We said earlier, what happens when, right? We said in the beginning of Tanya, you have these two souls and they're always fighting for control. But even when the godly soul gains control over the body, he has to operate, or he or she, whatever, the soul has to operate through your animalistic soul. I'll say that again. In order for when your godly soul takes control over the body and your body is going to be listening to your godly soul, that godly soul has to operate through the animalistic soul, because the animalistic soul is the conduit through which the godly soul can affect the body. So what does this mean practically? When I have my godly soul overcome my animalistic soul, which means I am going to do a mitzvah, in order to make me actually do a mitzvah, it has to be using my animalistic soul. And so, therefore, a mitzvah not only involves my body and not only involves my action, but it actually involves my animalistic soul. Okay, so now you're already seeing how a mitzvah is so much greater in a certain sense than Torah. Torah has very minimal involvement of your animalistic soul. Okay, much more minimal involvement, because you're not using the body that much. It's mostly the mind. It's mostly the higher element of yourself. Okay. So let us read this inside. How doing a mitzvah, and I appreciate the comments. Yes, correct. It's brilliant. God created the system specifically in a way that we are enmeshed with our animalistic soul to allow us to elevate it. And this connects to something I've said multiple times. When we are sent here to this earth, we are sent here to this earth to elevate our body, our soul, and our portion in this world. There's three parts of this world we need to elevate: our body and our soul, and we have a portion in this world that we need to elevate. So that's our each divine mission: our body, our soul, and a portion of the world. So let us continue with what he says. In order to pull the light and the glimmer of the Shekhinah, the divine presence, upon your body and animal soul too, the animal soul being the energizing soul which actually interacts with your body, to do this, you need to observe practical mitzvahs which are actually carried out using the body, because then your body's actual energy invested in the mitzvah act is absorbed in God's light. Let me see if the next page is clear. No, in God's light and his will, and is merged with God's will seamlessly. So when you do a mitzvah, now your godly soul is enmeshed with your animal soul, which is enmeshed with your body, and they all are merged currently to be doing God's will, which means God's will is right now resting on your body and your animalistic soul. So for everything we want to say, and we want to throw dirt at the animal soul, at the moment that you do a mitzvah, you are having a positive effect on the animalistic soul, right? And so he continues, and then this is the beauty. Sorry, let's continue. And the soul power which motivates the observance of the practical mitzvos is the third garment of the divine soul, the garment of action. So by observing a practical commandment, you bring the Shekhinah upon his third garment too. So again, Torah is mostly limited to your godly soul, mostly limited to thought and speech, and does not really affect your animalistic soul. Mitzvah reaches thought, speech, and action, reaches very much to your animalistic soul, and of course your divine soul as well. So a mitzvah is in many ways brings the divine presence into much greater areas than Torah study alone. And let's continue reading. And then when the divine soul's garment of action powers a practical mitzvah that's going to be so beautiful, the energizing animal soul from klipas noga, right? Remember, the animal soul comes from a klipa, a shell that covers over God, though it's klipas noga, it has a little bit of light in it, which interacts directly with the body, is temporarily transformed from evil to good. So remember we said earlier that how a tzaddik, a righteous person, has the ability to transform the evil in their soul to good. What we're reading here is beautiful. That even though I'm not a tzaddik, even though I'm not 100% righteous, but when I do a mitzvah, I can actually elevate. When I do a mitzvah, I can transform temporarily the evil in my soul to good. And as he continues, and it is actually absorbed into holiness like the divine soul itself. Now he's going to say here, this answers the question posed earlier in the chapter. Why was it necessary to enmesh the divine soul into the animal soul? Why couldn't the divine soul have been given its own independent access to the body? So he says, while the animal soul will never really change in its deep core, at the moment when a practical mitzvah is observed, the enmeshment relationship forces the divine soul to partner with the animal soul in order to access the body, and the result is the Shekhinah rests in the animal soul too. So remember, we started off in the beginning of the chapter, we wanted to know this Beinoni, this person, which is us, who will never manage to completely transform their animal soul. Why did God do this to us? Our soul was very happy in heaven. Our soul was much happier there. Why did it come down here to be bothered with the animalistic soul? And the answer is to do a mitzvah. Because when you do a mitzvah, when you put on those tefillin, whatever you're doing, you're bringing godliness, and not only you're bringing godliness to your soul, you're bringing godliness to the animal soul. Not only bringing godliness to your divine soul, you're bringing godliness to your animal soul. And that is something that can only happen if we were enmeshed with this animalistic soul. So even us people who will never transform our animalistic soul, that only means we cannot transform it forever. But we can transform it temporarily, multiple times every single day. Every single time we do a mitzvah, every single time we overcome our animalistic soul, we are automatically transforming the animalistic soul temporarily. And by the way, if you reach the level of a Beinoni, that really means all the time, because a Beinoni is someone who always makes the right decision. So pretty much all the time you are transforming your animalistic soul. Even though you're not transforming its inner core, because deep in itself it doesn't want to change, but you are forcing it at that moment to transform and to do good. And just to present this with a story, so we can appreciate this a little bit more. The story goes like this. One time, the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, was going on a mission to redeem poor Jews from prison. Back in the day, poor Jews would be thrown in prison for not paying their rent. And they'd be thrown into dungeons and whatever, and the Jewish community would have to raise money to redeem them. And there was this one miser in a town who was known, he would give everybody a rusty penny. And so eventually people stopped going to ask him for money because here's this wealthy guy giving you a rusty penny. Anyways, the Alter Rebbe went to his house and he sits down with the guy. And the guy was always known for being very nice and a gracious host. And he starts talking. What are you here for? Oh, you're here for this poor Jew stuck in prison. What a terrible story. I feel terrible for this Jew. I really want to help you. And he goes over to his drawer. He opens his drawer and he pulls out the rusty penny and he gives it to the Alter Rebbe. He gives him this rusty penny. And the Alter Rebbe looks at the rich man and says, thank you so much. Your penny is going to help so much. Every penny counts. This is really getting us closer to our goal. I really appreciate what you've done. And thank you so much for being a part of this mitzvah. And he leaves the house. And as he's leaving the house, the rich man starts to chase after him. And he invites the Alter Rebbe back in his home. He says, I thought about it. Maybe I could give you $1. Whatever the dollar was, a ruble, whatever it was. The Alter Rebbe again and gives him a whole thank you. And this repeats itself. First he gives him $1, then $100, then $1,000, until ultimately the rich man pays the entire money. So what happened here? What's the meaning of this story? The meaning of the story is understood by what we said over here. Now, it's how can you transform somebody by just doing a mitzvah, right? And we see this all the time. Someone does a mitzvah and suddenly they change, right? You've seen people change. Because what we see here is what happens when we do a mitzvah is at that moment, the animal soul is subdued. Okay, this happened just this week. I have the Merkez Shlichim, the young rabbinical students are going around knocking on doors and finding the Jews who are not very much connected. And they came to someone's home. It wasn't even on any list. They just saw a Jewish name. They knocked on the home. And it turns out this couple converted. Unfortunately, they converted to a different religion many, many years ago. There was a story behind it. Anyways, they converted. They had a bad experience with a rabbi, unfortunately. It's the story. And they decided to convert. And where they'd feel welcome. And the boys, they came to the house. They put on tefillin. They put up a mezuzah. And the family was crying. They were crying. They were very much shaken to the core, very much awakened. Their soul was awakened. Now, obviously, we'd have to follow up with them to make sure this continues. But what happened here? Someone who's been living with a different religion for so many years, and you tell them, no, you're really Jewish. Let's put on tefillin. Let's put up a mezuzah. What's going on here is exactly what we're reading here. Is that they're animalistic or their yetzer hara, their evil inclination, or the animal soul is what's controlling them most of the time. And maybe it's not their fault because they had a bad experience, and I'm not playing the blame game here, but whatever. But at that moment that they put on the tefillin, the moment they do the mitzvah, the moment they light the Shabbat candles, the animal soul is subdued at that moment, and so the true Jew within them can come out. The true soul that's within them can reveal itself. This is why you'll see Chabadniks standing at some of these anti-Israel protests, where there's unfortunately many Jewish students in there, and they're trying to grab these students to put on tefillin. And I know many Jews, they're not even Jewish, right? They're anti-Israel. They're wearing keffiyas. They're pro Hamas, whatever. And we say no. They're just overcome by their animalistic soul. We need to grab them, do a mitzvah, and at that moment when we do that mitzvah, that can be the beginning of a very long journey. For some it is, unfortunately for some it isn't, but for some it is. There's so many stories of students. Their first connection was being grabbed by the Chabad rabbi over there to put on tefillin, to hear a Torah thought, to come to a minyan, whatever it started with. Because we believe at that moment that they're doing the mitzvah, they are allowing the divine presence to rest within them, and the divine soul completely overcomes their animalistic soul. And so it allows a beautiful window into their soul and allows a beautiful divine presence even on our animalistic soul. Again, it's not only when we do a mitzvah, we allow our divine soul to reveal itself, but even the animalistic soul at that moment is overcome. That's a powerful thought. That is a powerful thought. And so that's what happened with this rich man. He did a mitzvah, and for a moment he felt the beauty of the divine presence resting within his godly and animal soul. And he wanted to experience more of it. Nobody until that point had taken a coin from him. So he was never able to get to the next stage because everybody took that coin and threw it back in his face. He never felt the beauty of the divine presence resting in his soul. When the Alter Rebbe took that coin and thanked him so much for it, that allowed the first moment of feeling that divine presence in his godly and animal soul. And then he wanted more of it, and then he wanted more of it, and more of it, and more of it, until he completely changed his life. And so we can take that idea in our lives too. So let's read this inside, where he again goes back at this idea that when we do a mitzvah, the divine presence rests even on the animal soul. So he says like this. He says, the Shekhinah rests on the animal soul because it is the one that caused the mitzvah deed and performed it. And without the animal soul, the divine soul would have no influence on the body at all. Since the animal soul was a crucial player in making the mitzvah take place, it acts as a medium through which the Shekhinah's presence can shine. For the divine soul is purely spiritual, and the body only physical and material, and the intermediary between them is the energizing soul, which interacts with the blood found in the person's heart and rests on his body. So our soul, someone asked me this question, but yeah, our soul, this is just another point, our soul, the animal soul rests in the blood. That's why when someone loses too much blood, there's not enough to hold on to the soul, and so the soul has to leave. It says in the Torah many times, nefesh habasar badamhi, the physical soul is in the blood. That's where it rests. Now, someone asked me the question, so if you get a blood transfusion, does that mean you get someone else's soul? The answer is no. The blood is just a place where your animal soul can grab onto, where it can be held onto. If you lose enough blood, you have nothing to hold onto your soul. If someone gives you blood, that helps you hold onto your soul, right? It's like getting a feeding tube, for example. It doesn't have to be originally yours, but you have to have enough sustenance to hold on to your soul. That's what, by the way, death is. Death is not actual death. Death is really the severance of the body and the soul. When the body is no longer able to hold on to the soul, that's when a person dies. That's what we call death. Is when the body can no longer hold into the soul, so the soul leaves the body, and so automatically the body is to an extent dead. It just means it doesn't have the soul. Okay, or at least not the living soul. It has a different soul, but that's for another time. It says the animal soul provides a crucial function, enabling the divine soul to communicate with the body. That's why the Shekhinah is able to rest on the animal soul. Okay. So before I go on to the next part, let's summarize what we said. We said that Torah is beautiful because it involves our garments of thought and speech, but it mostly involves thought and speech, and which are our inner garments, and it involves mostly our godly soul. I say mostly because there is an element of animal soul as well. But when we do a mitzvah, the benefit of a mitzvah is that we allow the Shekhinah, the divine presence, to rest not only in our godly soul, but also our animalistic soul, even though it's temporarily, but at that moment, the animalistic soul shining with the light of God, as well as our garments of thought, speech, and action. Okay, so a mitzvah has a much greater effect on our mitzvah allows the divine presence to rest in this world much greater than Torah study alone. So if I ask you what is going to be greater in bringing divine presence into this earth, the answer will now be mitzvos. Torah does it, but much less so than mitzvos do. Okay? So now so any questions before I move on to the next point? Questions or comments? Nope. All either very clear or all very, very unclear, as I always say. Okay, also, we ended off with a beautiful lesson of this idea is that sometimes we need to do a mitzvah in order to get to the next level. Do one mitzvah to allow you to do the next mitzvah. The Rabbi used to say many times, sometimes people would say, I'll wait to do the mitzvah till I understand. And the Rabbi say it's like someone who unfortunately is suffering from a mental illness and says, I'll only take the medication when I understand why I have to take it. And the answer is no, you need to take the medication to understand why you need to take it, right? So the same thing. Sometimes someone says, I don't want to do the mitzvah till I understand. When you do the mitzvah, then you'll have more of a capacity to understand why you should do the mitzvah. So that's why there's also an idea of doing a mitzvah even when you don't understand why you should do it yet. Okay. So now the question is going to be, how truly can the divine presence rest within us? In other words, we know from previous times that the divine presence doesn't like ego, doesn't like things that go against God. It has to rest in things that invite God in, which obviously includes listening to God. But clearly, the animal soul, is not interested in God. It's being forced to do the mitzvah, but it's not interested in God. So how is it possible for the divine presence to rest on the animalistic soul? Okay, and so his answer is going to be a word called galut, exile. Okay, galut means exile. What does exile mean? Anybody knows, what does exile mean? When you say someone is exiled, what is the meaning of exile? The inner meaning of exile, not what it looks like. What does it mean to be exiled?
Cast out,
Huh?
Like thrown
to
out.
be cast out.
Cast out, thrown out. Very
Yeah.
good. So exile means you are not in your happy place, so to speak, right? You are cast out of your place. That's what it means. Today we're in exile, right? We're outside of Israel, and even those who are in Israel are, to a certain extent, exile. We're not in the original Israel as God intended it to, with God's divine presence shining everywhere and no enemies within. Okay? So exile is a state in which something is where it doesn't really want to be. So, for example, we said when the temple was destroyed, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, went into exile. In other words, it had to leave the temple. It's an exile. Okay, the soul could be in exile. We explained earlier in the chapters, when we do a sin, our soul is still within us, but it's in exile, meaning it's in a place where it doesn't want to be. It's there, but it doesn't want to be there. So now we're going to flip it and say there's also something called the galut, the exile of the klipa, of the unclean forces. When a person does a mitzvah, then the unclean forces are found in exile. In other words, just as when we do a sin, the godly soul is found in a place where it doesn't want to be. Similarly, when we do a mitzvah, the animalistic soul may be found in a place where it doesn't want to be. That is what happens. Yeah, that's what happens when we do a mitzvah. Let's take a look in the. So let me just take it one step further. With this, we'll also understand that at the end of the day, there is a difference the way the divine presence will rest on our animal soul and the way it rests on our godly soul. The divine presence that rests on our godly soul is there in a very inner way, in a way that completely changes us, right? Whereas the divine presence that rests on our animalistic soul does not go into its kishka, so to speak. Just to give you an example, and I'm missing the English word here. When God came down at Mount Sinai and the divine presence was revealed in the entire earth and to the Jewish people to the largest extent, that was a divine presence that rested on the Jewish people, but it did not get deeply into them because they were not fitting for that presence. They were not fitting for that revelation. That is why 40 days later, they sinned again. They sinned with the golden calf because it was kind of forced upon them. So to speak, we would say their animalistic selves were exiled. I'll give you an example. Let's say you are experiencing a wonderful miracle from God. And at that moment, you're telling yourself, oh my gosh, I'm going to listen to Hashem forever. I'm never going to do another sin. I'm going to do only mitzvahs. I'm going to daven every day and do all the mitzvahs. And I'm going to become religious, blah, blah, whatever you promise yourself, right? Or the no atheist in the foxhole. However you want to do it. Okay, whatever is causing this feeling. That is a true feeling. And truthfully, you do feel God at that moment. But that revelation of God within you has not entered into the very essence of being of who you are. So it's there, but it's more of a external effect. The example is given, kind of the two ways that something can be affected is you can affect something internally or externally, right? So for example, the difference between how the environment affects us versus the way food we eat affects us. Everybody knows the environment affects us, but the food we eat truthfully becomes part and parcel of who we are and affects us in a much deeper way. So that's just an example. So let us now read this inside. So though we are saying the beauty of doing a mitzvah, we have to temper it and understand that nevertheless, we have not become tzaddikim, okay? We're still kind of, to an extent, limited. So let's read over here. The conclusion we have come to here is striking. Without a mitzvah, even a tzaddik, a righteous person, cannot cause the Shekhinah, the divine presence, to rest in his divine soul, even though the soul is a piece of God, because ultimately the divine soul has its own separate identity which blocks the Shekhinah. Yet with a mitzvah, the Shekhinah will even rest on the animal soul and the body, which are from Klipa. So we want to understand how is that possible. This leaves us with an obvious question. Why does the Klipa of the animal soul and energy, which conceals and opposes God's unity, not cause the Shekhinah's presence to be blocked? And so he says, I'm sorry, it's blurry here. Let me see if I took a picture of it again. I did, good, okay. And even though the deep core of the animal soul found in your heart, namely its negative traits, still have not been absorbed into holiness, and they remain a force of klipa. And we said earlier that ego, klipa, focus on self, pushes God out. He says, nevertheless, it's still possible for the Shekhinah, the divine presence, to rest on the animal soul and its powers, since they have been coerced into holy activity. And against their will, the powers of the animal soul voice their agreement, and they consent to and approve of the mitzvah observance, and as a result of the strength in the divine soul in the brain, which rules over the heart, Klipa's will to conceal God, which is why under normal circumstances it will block the Shekhinah divine presence. But when the body observes a mitzvah, the animal soul is simply overpowered and forced to act against its will by the divine soul. And in that temporary state, even the animal soul can manifest the Shekhinah, the divine presence, since unwillingly it participates in a mitzvah. So even though it doesn't want, it's actually doing the right thing. Right? So, yeah. And at that moment of the mitzvah, because what's the primary thing? You are, at the end of the day, when you're doing a mitzvah, you are placing God above your own desires. That's what happens when you do a mitzvah. And at the very moment of a mitzvah, the deep core of the animal soul and its powers are in a state of exile and dormancy, as explained in chapter 13. Therefore, the dormant deep core of the animal soul doesn't hold back the Shekhinah from resting on your body at that moment, because we've kind of sent them on a quick vacation. Okay? Turns out that while the powers of your animal soul are actively coerced into performing a mitzvah, the deep core of your animal soul simply remains passive and dormant during the act. But why then is the deep core of the animal soul crucial and indispensable to the mitzvah? It appears that the deep core wasn't involved at all. It just didn't get in the way. And if it wasn't involved, why should the Shekhinah shine through it? So he's asking a very simple question. If the deep core of your animal soul was like on vacation, so then what's the whole game? We are saying a mitzvah is so beautiful because you're involving the animal soul. But if the deep core of the animal soul is not involved anyways, what's the point? So the Talmud answers, what happens is the specific power invested by the energizing animal soul and observing the mitzvah with a specific part of your body becomes literally absorbed in God's light and seamlessly merged within it. Meaning, the totality of your animalistic soul does not become a part of God. But the part of your soul that is vivifying, the part of your body that is doing the mitzvah, that part of your body does become merged with God's light. So let's say you are lighting Shabbat candles. At that moment, your mouth saying the blessing, your hand lighting the candles, your eyes seeing the blessing, all of those are involved in the mitzvah. Is your entire animalistic soul absorbed in the God's divine light? No. But the part of your animal soul that is involved in doing the mitzvah does get absorbed in God's light. Okay? That part does get involved in God's light. And that goes back to the story we began the class with. We said the Reb Mendel of Kutsk said, where is God? Wherever you let him in. That's exactly what we're saying here. Is the divine presence will be present wherever we are letting him in. Whatever part of the animal soul that is being used to do the mitzvah, there is a divine presence of God. And he continues, and as a result, it draws a glimmer of light upon the rest of the energizing animal soul as a whole found throughout the body. So again, the part of your animal soul that is doing the actual mitzvah is completely absorbed in God's light. The rest of your animal soul, though it's not completely absorbed, it gets a shine of it. It's like when you bring something good into an area, some of the effects can spread. Like you put a heater in a corner of the room. Over there it's very hot. That corner of the room gets very hot. The rest of the room, gets a little warm as well. And he says, and also upon the physical body, the rest of the animal soul, including its deep core, is not literally absorbed in the Shekhinah since it was not directly involved in the mitzvah act, but since the animal soul and its powers are ultimately one entity, a glimmer of the Shekhinah does not spread to it into the whole body. And he says, but this glimmer only reaches the rest of the animal soul in a secondary, disengaged fashion, hovering outside the body from head to foot. That's what I explained earlier. It's like the Jews at Mount Sinai, where it affected, but it was more environment. It wasn't internal. There was no internal change. It's like us when we experience a miracle. It's not an internal change. And that's why a moment after we do a mitzvah, we can go back to being the same, whatever words you want to use, that we are. Okay, we can.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I was wondering, so is there any mitzvahs you could do that incorporates the whole animal soul, or is that maybe
So
I'm
yeah,
not
so
understanding.
the Tanya will get to it later, but it says that the mitzvah that is great. What do you think is the greatest mitzvah of all the mitzvahs? If you think about mitzvahs that we talk about being great, it's a very good question.
Like,
Torah?
I thought to love one another, serve one another, I thought.
Okay, that's feeling. Give me some more action.
Is it studying Torah?
No.
Charity.
Charity, very good, very good. Charity. Tanya will go at length about charity and how charity is the mitzvah that elevates and lifts up the most parts of our body. So again, but that's all based on this. You have to understand this in order to understand that. In other words, why is charity so important? If we understand that, what's the greatness of a mitzvah over Torah, right? The greatness of a mitzvah involves our animal soul. We will explain later how charity involves the most of our animal soul. Why? Because we basically have to use our entire bodies and beings and lives to make money. And so when we take some of that money that involved our entire being and give it away, then we've involved our entire body. Okay, when you light a candle, you're involving a certain part of your body. When you give away charity, that's the way we can involve the most of our body at any given moment. And that's why it's considered something that's described as the mitzvah. Charity is called the mitzvah. That's why in fast days we give charity, and charity is such a big mitzvah in Judaism and such a big important thing. Okay, let us continue here. Now he's going to explain. We began the chapter and we said that the Shekhinah rests on your head. Now we'll understand why it says rests upon your head. Based on what we're saying now, that when we do a mitzvah, we're affecting the soul, but the effect on the soul is not internal, but it's kind of more like the environment. It's not like eating food. It's like something, it's there, but it doesn't have a full effect. It's not, you're not internalizing it. That's why it says the Shekhinah rests upon your head. Not in you, but upon your head. Not that, of course, the divine presence doesn't go into your body, but the way it affects your body is more in a external and an outer effect. And similarly, it says that whenever there's a minion, over them, the Shekhinah rests. To emphasize that Shekhinah rests over them, but not in them. So it says that whenever you get a minion, even if you're not praying, okay, you get a minion of Jews, the divine presence is resting upon them. The divine presence is resting upon them. That is, so the word on them is very important here. Just as an aside, I came across this this clip yesterday, you know. So it's the clip was this comedian. He was saying people live in New York and they live on Long Island, right? Nobody lives in Long Island. You live on Long Island and you live in New York. So it's interesting, interesting because we talk about that over here. So so the Shekhinah rests on us, not in us. We're like a Long Island, okay? The Shekhinah will rest on us in the divine soul. It's like living in New York City. It lives inside of you, but otherwise it's on Long Island. It's on you. It's not in you. That was funny, and it fits with what we're saying here. Okay. Now let's end off with this idea. Now we're going to end off, the Alter Rebbe is going to prove this idea, how the Shekhinah can rest in only certain areas of our life and not in our entirety. And like, what do you mean? God is everywhere. And he's going to, and like I said, we began the class saying God will rest wherever you let him in. So let us read this. And he's going to prove this it says in the Talmud. He says, now every manifestation expression of the Shekhinah's light, which is a revelation of the blessed infinite light, could not be termed a change in God, God forbid, nor an expression of multiplicity. So you might say, what do you mean? If God is resting only in my hand, and he's only resting in your head, and he's only resting in his foot, doesn't that mean that there's multiple gods, there's multiple Shekhinahs? And he says the reason why this is the case can be gleaned from what is stated in the Talmud, that a certain heretic said to Rabban Gamliel, you say that over every 10 the Shekhinah rests. So how many Shekhinahs do you have, right? If you have 20 minions, does that mean that the God is in 20 places? Rabbi Gamliel answered him with the example of sunlight from a single sun which can enter through many windows. The multiple manifestations and expression of the Shekhinah only exist when viewed through the many windows of the recipient's perspective. From the true reality of God's perspective, his unity does not change through manifestation, just as the sun does not change when you open a window to let its light in. And the wise will understand. So in summation, and we're going to show a beautiful video to end off this class, but in summation, what he's saying here is that the divine presence will rest. The divine presence is basically will come wherever you let him in. Now, God is obviously everywhere. So what does it mean divine presence will rest wherever you let him in? It means you will be able to see God wherever you let him in. God can be revealed wherever you let him in. But the reality is that God is truthfully everywhere. Now I'm going to share this beautiful video, a story of the Rabbi, of someone who's questioning where is God, where the Rabbi basically gives the answer that the Tanya here says, but it's presented through this person's life. It's one of the more popular Chabad stories, but this is how we'll end the story to bring this whole idea home and how slowly, through letting God more into our life, we can change. So let's see this video.
Rolling Stones. In 1972, I was on a concert tour with the Rolling Stones on their American tour. It was a 2-month summer tour. I was 24 years old at the time, and not exactly a spiritual experience, let's say, but several months later after that tour, I had a friend contact me from California that just came to New York through France. He was a Zen Buddhist, not Jewish. I was in the house of a very close friend of mine. His name was Chip Monk, who was the staging and lighting manager for the Rolling Stones. And meanwhile, my friend is laying this whole Zen Buddhist outline to me, and it sounded very interesting. And for some reason, spiritually, I awakened, and I'm asking myself, how can Yiddishkeit be right and the whole world wrong? That was the question that kept on percolating in my mind. And I had a close relationship with Rabbi Garari, who was the shliach in Buffalo. At the time, I was in the University of Buffalo, even though I was taking time off for the music industry. And I called him, and I started sharing some of the questions with him. I was in New York at the time, and he said, there's only one person that could help you, and that's the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He gave me an address, go to 770 Eastern Parkway, meet my brother-in-law, I believe his name was Yossi Hendel. You seek him out, and you come exactly at this time. It was a bitter cold winter day in January of 1973. You'll meet my brother-in-law, and the Rebbe will be going. He's coming from the Oyel to daven Mincha, and he'll come out in front of 770, and maybe you'll have an opportunity to talk to him. And I'll try to paint a picture of what I looked like at the time. I'm wearing snakeskin boots and tight jeans, a leather jacket, no gray, not in my beard, not in my very long hair that was shoulder length at the time. I'm waiting outside, and I saw an old limousine pull up, and I remember Yossi moved back away from me, and distinguished Rav comes out of the car, and I go over and approach the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And Yiddish is my first language, as I said earlier. And I stopped him right in front of the steps of 770. I went over to him. And in Yiddish, and I learned Yiddish at home, so there's going to be some grammatical and errors in it, but I stopped the Rebbe and said, Schuldig, instead the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Excuse me, are you the Lubavitcher Rebbe? Our eyes lock. I never in my life saw eyes. I never saw eyes like the Rebbe's eyes before. And he didn't say, yes, I am the Rebbe. He didn't say no. He said, was ist dein Name und von wann bist du? What is your name and where are you from? I give him my name, tell him where I'm from, where my parents are from. And I said, ich habe eine Frage. I have a question. He says, frag, ask. And I ask him, and our eyes are locked. It's all of a sudden, it's like there's nothing around us, it's just the two of us. It was an incredibly spiritual experience for me. And I asked him, wo is Gott? Where is God? And the Rebbe answers me, umetum, every place. I said, ich weiß, I know. Aber avu, but where? And he answers again. In Yiddish, we're talking. Umitum, in alles, in everything, in every place. In a beam, in a tree, in a stein, in a stone. I'm quoting word for word. And I say to the Rebbe, ich weiß, aber avu, I know, but where? And he said something that really blew me away, so to speak. He said, in dein Herz, ob das ist wie du fragst, in your heart, if this is how you're asking. I found that it would be difficult to express myself in philosophical terms in Yiddish. I asked him if I can switch to English, and he said, speak in English. And our eyes are still totally locked. I felt like we were transported to another time, to another place, really transcending the physical bounds. And I asked him, isn't it when we say, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, whether you are a Jew or a black man or an Indian, there's only one God for all of us? And the Rebbe answered, the essence of the black man is to be what he is as a black man. And the essence of the Indian is to be what he is as an Indian. And the essence of the Jew is tied to Hashem Yisborach through Torah and Mitzvot. And those, for me, was very, very powerful words. We spoke for approximately 15 minutes on the steps of 770 in a very, very bitter, cold day in January. And he gave me two things to do. One, to learn the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch in English, and the other to start putting on tefillin. The Rebbe went on. I guess I must have kept him for Mincha. And I went back to my friend's place. I didn't change the next day. I didn't change 2-3 weeks later. But about 2-3 months down the line, I started putting on tefillin, which I had not put on for several years. From that day till today, I've never missed. And as they say, mitzvah gereres mitzvah, one mitzvah leads to another mitzvah. Baruch Hashem, today I have 4 beautiful children, all of them in Derech Hashem.
All right, this feels almost illegal.
Beautiful.
All right, yeah, beautiful, beautiful. A lot to unpack in the story, but as you see at the end of the video, obviously the guy was seeking Hashem, and basically the Rebbe told him the way to find Hashem is by studying what you have to do practically. Study the code of Jewish law, do mitzvos, and that's how you're going to let God into your life. But obviously God was already in his life. He was asking those questions, but to bring him more into your life is to do the practical. So, all right, thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll stop the recording now. And we'll see you all tomorrow night, God willing, for the class on Mashiach.
Thank you.